All right, we are here today to talk The Haunted Man and the Ghosts Bargain by Charles Dickens. We are going through his 5 Christmas stories, and we're just going to keep it a little chatty. We're going to talk about the story, maybe talk about some of the meanings here, because I don't. It feels like it's pretty easy to get negative on this one. I don't know, I've seen a lot of negative publicity, but I think there's some pretty good depth to this one.
I don't understand why this one gets a bad rap. Now, however, I will mention that we have not read all five yet. This is the fourth out of the Christmas collection by Charles Dickens. I thought it was okay. I think that it gets a bad rap. I think that if you read it first, maybe do just go completely up from here. If you read it last, maybe you do feel a little bit let down. But I think there's some really good nuggets for how Christmas revitalizes the spirit and leads to you becoming a better person. But I think there's a little bit more depth to it that we can get into as well.
All right, you've been recording with me long enough. You know this is coming at this point. What's your one sentence for this story? What's your tagline?
Misery loves company.
Oh. I couldn't think of a good one. Like I don't have a good, but like at the core, it's about how memory forges our identity. Is kind of how I would summarize this one. And I don't know if you knew this or not. I'm not like a scholar by Dickens. Everybody knows that, right? But about a month before he started writing this, like Dickens lost his sister Fanny, like in real life. Like the author lost his sister, and I think that stress, like we've seen that with, if you remember when we read what we thought was Dostoevsky's best book, the Brothers Karamazov, when he lost his son Alyosha, and you see the way that he exonerates and challenges the point of life. I think Dickens struggles with that through this book, right? Like he's losing his sister. What is it? What does a memory mean? What does it mean to be over that pain? And I think that makes it a very touching novella.
For me, it really associates with that idea that some people define themselves through their pain, or their pain is a pivotal moment in their lives. I think a lot of us can relate to the fact that a core memory can be built around a painful event, a traumatic experience can lead you on a different path. The death of a parent, the death of a child, the loss of love, your innocence stolen. When you find out about Christmas, those things can divert you from a path that you've known all along, and that can be gut wrenching. And I think that's what I kind of saw here in this story for Redlaw.
Yeah. And each of our stories can be different, but we can have shared trauma in these moments, like this core memory. It's going to be different. Like the elements are different for every person, but the emotion, the loss, and the character building, perhaps, it can be shared. This is one way that I kind of tried to like nuance this one out. There's a letter I'd like to read from Dickens, written just after this was published, to the Earl of Carlisle, if I may. Says, people will take anything for granted in Arabian Nights or the Persian tales, but they won't walk out of Oxford Street or the marketplace of a county town directly into the presence of a phantom, albeit a allegorical one. And I believe it to be essential that they come to that spectre through such a preparation of gathering gloom and darkness as it would be for them to go through such an ordeal in reality before they could get up a private ghost of their own. And I kind of thought about what that meant, the idea of having your own private ghost, the way that, if we just kind of jump into this high level, right, we have a lot of description in the beginning about the town, about a haunted man, about the dwellings in which he lives, right? Like the darkness, the fact that sun doesn't hit the corners and such. And it all kind of comes to this picturesque Dickensian scene where we have doom and gloom, right? Like it's darkness. Like the atmosphere is influenced by Redlaw's memory, right? Because he's in despair. He feels like he's being worked to the bone, and he's got this trauma. We don't know yet, but he's got the loss of his sister that's weighing down on his soul, and you can see the darkness and the gloomness pervading the scene, kind of like that movie Inside Out, if you remember that, where like a memory can be tainted. It could be happy in one moment, but also be sad in the next, depending on the lens in which you view it.
I think this brings it back to kind of what you said before is Redlaw, the main character who's experiencing all of this trauma, all of this grief, he's looking for some way, not necessarily maybe to exercise it, but some way to cope with it. And how do a lot of us cope with that? Through loved ones, through family, through friends, through discussion, through having a conversation. He doesn't seem to have that. He's lacking that community. And that always comes back to seeing a core system of the Dickens Christmas novels, novellas, is this centerpiece of that family and the community is something that you can rally behind and that can help you persevere through these difficult times. And I think that Redlaw just he wallows in that misery until it just encapsulates every fiber of his being. And it just it's heartbreaking. And I think that's the core of the story of why it starts that way, because you need to sit there with him to understand why he does what he does through the course of the story.
Well, and do you think everyone feels the same way as Redlaw in the scene? I mean, we have William Swidger, we have his wife Millie Swidger, and then the dad. Gosh, I just can't seem to remember how old he is. I think they might have said his age once or twice.
He's 87. I'm 87. I'm
I'm
87. You
87.
87? 87 years old I am.
Right, but Millie's she's throwing up that holly, right? She's throwing up the Christmas cheer. Again, it is one of the darkest, bleakest times of the year around the winter solstice, but it's also a time of rebirth where every day gets a little bit lighter sooner thereafter. But do you feel that the doom and gloom that surrounds the area, and he is perhaps bringing them down a little bit, but do you think everybody has that? Like, is everyone affected by his doom or gloom in this scene?
No, and I think that's where Dickens thrives in writing this is that it's realistic that everybody has those feelings, but not everybody dwells on those feelings all the time like Redlaw does. Not everybody expresses those feelings outwardly to everybody. You keep those to yourself. You don't go around when you ask, "Hey, how are you doing?" "Oh, I'm good." When you're not really good, you don't tell a complete stranger, or you don't tell somebody just in casual passing how you really feel. It's a little white lie, but it's something that is socially acceptable because people really don't want to have those depths of conversations with just anyone.
Sure. And I think maybe, I mean, skipping fast forward to the kind of the end of the book, Millie's kind of immune to it. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
that endless compassion. Like to me, she was the embodiment because we know Dickens was heavily, he was religious. Yeah, he was religious, and she embodies a lot of those Christian ideals. I would say
Yep.
because
Yes.
the humility, the compassion, the caring, the when I say humility, I mean I don't know. I guess I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but she's not educated. She's not working. Well, she's in the class, but she's not working herself per se.
Yeah. Yeah, she just got back from the market and she actually feels guilty about that. And she's very honest, about how she feels about going to the market. And Millie does embody that goodness where Redlaw is the other side of the coin. Uh, there's these two pieces in the story that not aren't necessarily battling, but there's a tug of war going back and forth here inside of Redlaw himself, but also in the greater theme of the story as well.
What I was trying to get at, and I failed miserably, sorry, is Swidger, well, the Philip and basically the William. I thought that there was an interesting dynamic between them because of this whole generational shared trauma and happiness that we have. Like the 87-year-old old man, I think dotes and like looks positively upon the next generation is how I read it. But I think the younger generation is almost like ashamed that he's not living up to his dad's standards. Like there's almost like this desire to be better, I felt like in some sense. And maybe it's he wants to provide better for Millie too, right? Like if we look at mid 1800s for England, we didn't exactly have like when it comes to like the upper class, lower class, middle class, it doesn't look like what it does today compared back to then. Like the Industrial Revolution changed a lot in terms of what the haves and have-nots from like a middle class perspective.
Yeah, not much of a middle class, probably. More of, yeah, this is definitely be lower end. And I think that you might feel like a failure. You maybe look and see, oh, my father did so well, and I'm not living up to his expectations. He says I am, but I can see my own reality and it's not what he says it is. And it gets back to that idea of, what do these memories mean? Is my dad missing some piece of his memory? Is he remembering wrong? What does it really mean when you're 87 years old? You might not be as sharp as you once were, and you not be able to recall those memories as vividly as they truly happened. Not to say that he is, an unbelievable character in the sense that we don't believe what he says, but it's there very obviously to me that age might be a factor. It's mentioned so many times.
Well, and repetition is used constantly through this, right? Like
Yes.
the words and the sentences repeat themselves. I took it kind of as a play on how the past and memories shape us. Even our words that we choose, we tend to come to familiarized phrases and sentences. We relive the past and trauma, and that teaches us. Like, I thought it, I took it as a very intelligent way of playing with how the past and characterizations shape us, per se.
Yeah, I agree with that. So get a little bit more into the story. Redlaw is visited by the demon, the ghost, the whatever, and basically given the opportunity of, you can make people how you are and forget your past trauma, and then you might be happy again. It doesn't necessarily come out exactly that way, but he kind of gets this ability to where he negates the pain of the past and he can pass that on to other people. And then there's like this little child thing, I don't know, cretin that appears. What did you think of that
Of the what was it? The tattered clothes
child
held
thing?
together. Yeah,
Yeah.
he reminded me a lot of Ignorance and Want from A Christmas Carol. He was a metaphor, but I think he was also one of two things, creatures, people who were immune to this. I'm gonna call it a curse, like the curse of forgetting, the curse of losing, um, pain, sorrow, everything related to it. There's only two people who are kind of immune to it. One being Millie, two being this, yeah, two being this boy, right? And I think there's a great summary in the end of the third section. But to me, that's what he was. He's kind of like this metaphor to represent a feral creature who's lost his connection to humanity, just no hope. And that connection to humanity, that desire to share experiences and pain and happiness is, I think, very important to Dickens. I think memory is an important part of that too, because remember, he's lost Fanny. He's probably in a lot of pain of losing a sister, and yet remembering her is painful. Remembering her is necessary because there was a lot of happiness, and hopefully that happiness outweighs the negatives, right? So if you just give up and don't have any connection to humanity, like this boy, he's kind of like that predecessor to what does it mean to be human, I think.
Yeah, I like that. One other thing that you had asked me at the beginning and we kind of talked about was how this book is received. And if you take it in the context of the supernatural and the growth of yourself as a person in relation to Christmas and rebirth and all of that, maybe it does rank lower. But as I was reading this story and I thought about some of the non fantastical elements of it, I really kind of elevated my thought of, wow, Dickens was so ahead of his time. In this story, Redlaw, the main character, is a chemist. And I don't know if Dickens knew this or they were really kind of aware how memories worked in the brain and everything. I mean, you got to remember, medical science made leaps and bounds after 1850, 1860, 1870. I don't know if they would have understood the idea of brain chemistry and chemicals and depression and the dopamine hits and
Mm.
how that all
Mm-hmm.
really in there. This guy's a chemist. That just,
Mm.
I don't know. It seems too on the nose for me
Hmm.
that all of this of memory and everything. Yeah, I mean, you can say it stores in your heart and your soul, but biologically, most likely, it's all really stored in your head, in your brain. And this guy can't seem to shake that. And it's almost like reminds me of the movie Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where it's like there's two pieces here. All the good is in one piece, and all the bad is in another piece. and they're differentiated out, and that's a struggle because it's that happy balance of having them together that Redlaw needs to find, that he's working towards, that uplifting feeling at the end of the story.
Well, I think that's a good point because, like, what is this specter, right? Like, it is a lot of the gloom, a lot of the negativity. I took it a little bit of like the monkey's paw, almost like a promise for something, but that actually means something else, right? Like, I promise you'll forget your sorrow, but then, oh, by the way, you're going to lose your connection to humanity, kind of a deal. Um, but the fact that he looks like Redlaw, the fact that he is that man, I think was the quote from the story. Like, there's
Yeah.
a bit of a, like, when we talk about Edgar Allan Poe, like the doppelganger effect, right? What you're really seeing is the true version of yourself as opposed to the societal mask of yourself, right? The desire of what you really want is to forget the sorrow, but the mask that you wear is almost maybe even more important because that's what connects you to the humanity in some regards. It's almost necessary to put on the smile and try to move on like a performing seal,
Yep.
because sometimes that's, like you said earlier, I think you brought up someone said, how you doing? Well, you don't say like, I feel like crap, right? Like, it'd be like, oh, okay, well, who invited him to the party, right? Like, there are certain things that break that social nicety thing that are necessary, that the mask is almost sometimes necessary. And the way I kind of looked at it, going to the Edgar Allan Poe thing, is I kind of looked at a little bit of like how Carl Jung viewed the subconscious, like that there were certain desires that we have that if we don't satisfy in some way can actually be quite negative, like the shadow work. Like, we might have these carnal and evil desires if we look at it from a Christian standpoint, perhaps the way Dickens would, right? The devil is tempting us to do something that we want, but how do we know whether we should? There's a lot of things I want to do, but there's a lot of things I
Yeah, right?
ought not to do, right?
Yeah.
And how do you find that right balance of right and wrong, and that connection, and what is actually going to be better for yourself and society? I kind of think is actually a very interesting take on this story, to think about the specter as his own subconscious desires that perhaps he needs to figure out how to satiate in a different way.
And again, it brings me back to the idea that this guy's a chemist, and there's not a lot to allude to it. That is he taking some type of, medication or drug or something? It's, if you go the supernatural route, which is very easy, and obviously it fits in well with all the other Dickens stories. He's had a spiritual lobotomy, right? He's had this supernatural, ping to his head, and now he forgets all the negative and allows him to move through life in a different sense. And that's what it just keeps coming back to. And there's different ways to interpret that, but I think that this story gets more of a bad rap than it should, because there's a lot of nice little nuggets in there that I think that not only fit the Christmas spirit, but also more to the human condition than just what we see, those one key point in a Christmas carol, and the others, on the hearth and et cetera, et cetera.
Or are we gonna? I mean, it's like, are we gonna talk about some of the other characters? Like, I don't. I agree. Like, I'll put it this way: I started reading about the Teddarbys, right? I'm like, what's going on? Like, we just, I felt like a 180 shift. Like, am I learning about new characters each chapter? And it's only later you learn that, Redlaw finally appears with his, his curse, the Midas touch, where everything he touches just turns into a disconnected, hatred, self-centered person, right? The Teddarbys are this family, working class, right? And they kind of turn on each other. They get more self-centered. The wife doesn't even know if she wanted to be married because of how poor they were. Like, some real heartbreaking things come out here. And eventually, of course, it gets reversed. And then you have the student upstairs that he goes to visit, the sick student that Millie's been taking care of. And he's like, he starts to be mean and like doesn't even like really like want anything to do with Millie, because like, since he's forgotten all the pain and the sorrow of her caring for him. And again, there's Millie being the immune, constant, nurturing Christian ideal, is kind of how I viewed her. He like wants to reject her and forget everything about her because of the pain, but really like that ideal and that push, the mask that you wear, is what brought him back to humanity, and he learns to regret that. And Mr. and Mrs. Tedarby resolve each other, even though I kind of laughed a little bit. I don't think it was meant that way, but when she's just like, you have that air of home about you," I'm just like, "That's some friend zone comment right there, Mrs.
Ugh.
Tedarby."
Ouch. Friend zoned on Christmas.
Uh, y- but I mean, it does come around. But like the point being is that each of these characters, when they started thinking about themselves, when they stopped thinking about society, about caring, nurturing, thinking of others, it broke down. Like they just they lost their. They became more like that child. You asked me the tattered child or whatever, right? They became more like him, like just the cat that will just bite the hand that feeds him if it's worried or scared because it's constantly just looking out for itself.
I think emotions are a hard thing, especially during the holidays. It can be a very emotionally charged time for people because of family, because of loss. Nothing ever stays exactly the same. We've talked about that before in our own personal experiences with Christmas and the holidays and what are our best Christmas memories and why. And they're probably not exactly true how we remember them, but they're the best that we have and we're okay with that. And then when a new Christmas memory comes along, a new tradition, you start comparing it to the old. And I think that's hard for a lot of us to accept, at least for it is for me personally. And this story, I think, is about accepting oneself. And there's so much to it. And I think that because there's so many different characters, sometimes it's hard to follow along with all the different people and their comings and goings and how they're feeling and interacting with Redlaw and what that means. But I think that there is uh, hope there in the end, which is one of the core tenets of the Christmas stories that Dickens puts out. It's good stuff.
There's a lot to the characters, to your point, where like I wasn't even sure how they were connected until kind of like the end when you said how Millie was like the constant through it, and then Millie was the salvation, right? He needed to, like the Spectre basically prods him to be like her, like to focus on humanity and that sort of thing, and accept that we might have pain in our lives, but it's part of what forges our moral character. It's part of what forges our memories. There's the I remember I will never be able to relate as well as this one time I heard it, but there's you've heard the Theseus ship, right? He had the
Yeah.
ship. If I replace one piece, like a plank of wood, is it still his ship? Yes. Okay. What about if I replace the next plank of wood? Well, yeah, that's still his ship. What about the next plank of wood? And you just keep replacing every piece of wood. Is it still his ship? Right? Like, what if every piece of wood in that ship is completely replaced? Is it still the same ship? I think you have that with humans too, right? Like, you have people that have gone through traumatic experiences where they've lost perhaps body parts. They can't walk or do the same things that they used to. That their physicality might completely change, or they might dye their hair a different color or shave their hair completely off. Alopecia, right? They might lose their hair. You would never look at that person and be like, that's no longer crypto. That's no longer Una. Like, the identity is way deeper than the physicality of ourselves, right? The surface level thing. But when you start replacing memories and say, okay, like people forget things. We don't remember everything, right? But when you start forgetting certain things, uh, there's a part where like it's my grandma recently passed away. She had dementia, and I'll never forget. My dad said, "She's no longer your grandma." And that was a really hard thing to hear because like she didn't know who I was. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know her own son. And the idea that you can actually accept that that person's no longer the same person because they don't have the memories, that kind of confirms that memories are the consistent element that makes us who we are. So to try to start taking things away like Theseus' ship, when is it you've taken away too many that you're no longer the same person? And I think that's what the story conveys at its heart.
Oof. That hits me in the home because I have the exact same feeling. And I think a lot of people can relate to that of a grandparent or parent that no longer recognizes who you are and they're gone. The shell of the body is still there, but who they are is gone. And that's the worst fate of all. Yeah, I think that those memories not only maybe define who you are, but define who you are to others. And it kind of brings us back to that idea of community. And I think that having that pain, while hurtful in the moment, I think can be I don't want to say good. Good is not the right word. And it makes you callous in a good way because you want a little bit of callus. You want to, stick to Theseus' ship. You don't want the wood to be perfect. You want to have a little bit of grit to the wood,
Mm,
right? So you can step
mm-hmm,
on it and not slip and fall. So I think that
mm-hmm.
some pain is good because it gives you a baseline and it helps you define what happiness is. It also allows you to protect yourself as well. So having that little bit of buffer is okay. But when it's gone, that's when you should be in trouble. And I think that, yeah, that's kind of what the story conveyed for me.
We need to keep our memory green, which is why we record these videos. Is hopefully it keeps our memory green.
I thought, oh, yeah. Oh, man. Speaking of which, I so thought you were going to bring something up with colors because green and red law, I thought there had to be something there. There's nothing.
Oh,
There's nothing.
well, I didn't think about the colors, but I did think about light and darkness, right? Like he was entering a room to be dark, and I remember when he was like going up to that room with a student, he gathered a light specifically. So if you look at how Dickens uses like darkness and light in this story, there definitely is symbolism there. But I did
Mm.
not have something for the color. Not saying it's not there. I just didn't have anything for the colors.
Okay. Well, next time.
Well, all right. That means the last one we have is the Battle of Life. I think it is for us to read, and then we were going to redo what is it? The
The
Cricket
cricket
on
on the
Earth.
hearth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that. Well, yeah, we're going to redo that one. So hey, and we got two more Christmases, and then we'll have wrapped up the Dickens stories. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this. Playlist down below of other Christmas stories. I'm going to start trying to figure out what are our Christmas talks and put them in a playlist. And that way, those that want to kind of celebrate Christmas in a different way, we've got a bunch of stories for you. Thank you for spending time with us today. My name's been Una. Peace.
Merry Christmas and happy holidays.